is Gus Hunninghake. I am a producer, and I have been in my career for a year and 7 months. I started here. This is my first job. So this is the longest I've been anywhere because yeah.
Wonderful. And how did you first become interested?
When I was in college, I started doing journalism in high school. And when I went into college, I initially started doing print, doing a lot of writing for the school newspaper. I also did a lot of podcastings, a lot of stuff in the digital realm. It wasn't until I was a senior in college that I started getting into television and television news. And it was then that I produced my first live news show. And it kind of happened. I honestly had no idea that I was going to be where I was, because up until about 6 months before I graduated, I thought I was going to do print, be doing stuff for, publications that was more digital, nothing that was live television or on air. So that's kind of where it started. I majored in journalism, news and information. There are two tracks. You could do news and information or marketing, essentially. I also minored in film studies, which wasn't really relevant other than it just kept me writing. I knew when I got to college that I wanted to write. I wasn't sure if it was going to be in journalism or some other form of writing. So I did film just as kind of a way to make sure that I wasn't taking math classes all the time or anything like that. I also made sure in high school to do somewhat well on my AP science and math tests, so I wouldn't have to take those in college either. I went to a state school, so a 4 was good enough. So, but yeah, my major was journalism, my minor was film studies. Ooh, for a producer, gosh, I would say being able to think ahead, always be forward thinking. You have to be present in what's going on or what you're currently working on, but one of the, I think, best traits you can have is the ability to always be thinking about what's coming next. What do I have to do next? What do I have to accomplish next? What's coming, whether it's that before the show starts, or whether it's when you're in the show, when it's live, you have to be thinking about what's coming up next. What do I have to do to prepare for that? Because if you're prepared as a producer behind the camera, it makes everything that happens in front of the camera a lot easier for those people. So for me, since this was my first, I graduated school in May of 2019. I got this job in August of 2019. So I had no prior experience whatsoever. And this is a mid-major market. So it's a little bigger than where I probably should have started. But since I was straight out of school, my starting salary was around $32,000, paid hourly. As far as potential for growth goes, I don't quite know because it's still relatively new to me, but I know in bigger markets especially, producers are contracted, and contracts usually guarantee some sort of increase year to year. It's kind of a way for your boss or your news director to guarantee that you are making a little more money each year. Colorado Springs is last year was the 87th or 88th market in terms of audience size in the country, which means there are 86 or 87 other markets above them that all use producers, all have a person like me working on a morning show or working on the night show. So as far as growth goes, just in terms of bigger cities you can go to, bigger markets you can go to, there's a ton of potential for growth there. And usually moving up in markets, the money kind of follows that as well. Well, since we work on the morning show, speaking of talking about environment first, It's a relatively small work environment. I think on a given day when we're fully staffed, when we have a photographer, we have an editor, we have a photographer that comes in Wednesday to Sunday, and helps work on the morning show with us. When our live reporter's here, when I have a co-producer, there's still never more than maybe 9 people, 10 people. And our photographer and live reporter is here for maybe 45 minutes just to kind of get their end of the show covered, and then they're, out the door. So work environment is very, very tight, very compact. We don't interact with a ton of people before or after the show. I come in at 12:45 in the morning. So for me, it's about 2 hours of just complete me, or also my co-producer when there is a co-producer here, just myself or us two working on the show, kind of putting it together, and then the EP comes in, anchors come in, editors come in. It's kind of a slow rolling process to get the full staff here. But yeah, it's relatively compact, especially if you work overnights like I do. There's usually a decent amount of time where you're here just kind of by yourself, doing your own thing, getting stuff done. The nice thing about that is it makes work relationships a little more manageable. Some people are obviously people persons, but getting to work with such a tight and usually consistent group, and even when we have people like filling in, it never changes much, and that makes kind of developing a repertoire with each other, kind of a second hand as far as like putting the show together, running the show. It makes all of that a lot easier to kind of accomplish. So that's a huge advantage, is the fact that we have such kind of a tight-knit group. Waking up on time. That is probably the single most biggest challenge, because I've tried different schedules. I've tried going to bed right when I get home at 10 in the morning. I've tried waiting and doing stuff until late afternoon around 4 or 5 and sleeping till 11, and then waking up around 11 or 11:30 and getting ready then. And what I've learned is when you come in at 12:45, there's no perfect way or schedule, especially with seasons changing. If the sun comes up earlier, if it goes down later, that plays into kind of the challenge of getting up and getting around on time. Also, time moves a lot slower in my head than it actually does, meaning when I get up in the morning and get ready, I think I'm doing good. I'm getting ready on time. Things are, I can get some coffee going, have a cup of coffee before I go, and then I look at my clock and realize 30 minutes have gone by and I haven't even put clothes on. I've just been kind of fumbling around, brushing my teeth, putting deodorant on, and all of a sudden it's 12:15 and I'm going to be 5 minutes late in 5 minutes. So that's a huge challenge, especially for producers working this kind of shift, is figuring out how to stay rested, how to consistently stay rested. My schedule shifts pretty much every other week in terms of what I'm trying. I bought blackout curtains. That's kind of helped. The next step is probably some form of noise cancellation. That's a challenge. Another challenge for me was being so new in the profession, coming into a show or in an environment where there's a lot of seasoned vets, people who have been doing this a lot longer than I have, who are really, really good at what they do. So a big challenge for me was trying to prove myself, I guess. And you run into that anywhere you go. I think that's a good challenge to have to put upon yourself, is to try and be in a state where you're trying to kind of show people what you got. For me, it felt a little less self-imposed coming here because I knew I was going to be working with people who were, at least from what I knew, really good at their jobs. And that took, it's a challenge I still kind of work through every once in a while, trying to feel like I'm proving myself and like I'm doing my job right. In my current schedule with what I do, no. I mean, now granted, I'm 23, so what do I know about having a family or anything like that? But from what I've experienced, I would find it really hard to keep a schedule where you come in at midnight, are home at 9, exhausted all day, probably struggling to kind of keep that regular schedule that everyone else is on kind of at the front of your mind. From where I sit though, no, I would say it's a tough sell to work in this environment with these hours and work on family life, trying to build and raise a family. I'd say that'd be a pretty tough thing. The people I work with. Some places, I think most places probably struggle to find a crew that has the chemistry that our morning show does. I think we all work really well with each other. We get along when the cameras are off and we're in the newsroom just having a meeting or just talking about the rest of the day, what's going on. Because we're so kind of small and there's, a very steady, unchanging group of people, I think that makes it a lot easier to do that too. The fact that we're not always bringing new people on to kind of bring on to what we do and kind of, show them the ropes. I mean, I don't know that I would even be here if it wasn't for the people I work with. They, are really good about keeping me in check, lifting up the work that I do. I like to think that I help lift up the work that they do. There's kind of a mutual respect for each person's job. And it's something I wasn't expecting when I graduated. Sort of graduated and then 3 months later get thrown into a crew where every expectation you had was kind of thrown out the door. I mean, I was thinking, incompatibility with work ethic, major egos, things like that. That's what I was told in college, was when you get, into the professional world, there's some of those things that you have to deal with people in the newsroom. And I got on this crew and that wasn't really a thing, and it was surprising, and that's been the highlight of working here ever since, really. I don't know, I guess it kind of depends on if live television news as it currently stands is around. People have been saying newspapers are going to be a thing of the past for 25 years, and they're still in circulation everywhere you go. And that's not to say they haven't changed. Things have, a lot of publications do digital work now, which is something that this station works on. I don't know how exactly my role with what I do now, because so much of what I do now is it pretty much exclusively in the realm of what's going live Monday to Friday. I don't do most of the work I do doesn't really involve much digital work right now. My role as a producer is very traditional as it stands. I think one thing that could change is the idea that producers take on a much more technical role as far as actually putting a show together. Like, we run automated systems here, so a lot of what directors do is actually inputting commands into a rundown that tell the cameras and the microphones and pretty much everything you see in here what to do, when to do it. I think as a producer, that's a role that we could probably potentially start taking on as things kind of do move more towards the digital realm, because that's where pretty much everything is going to go. Taking on a little bit more of a technical responsibility for whether it's what actually goes on the web, what kind of content you're seeing on the web. A lot of what I do is kind of intaking, however many stories in a given day, and kind of deciding what I think is going to be most important to the audience that I know is watching. And that's not a job that's all on me, but that is a big part of what my job is kind of filtering out what I think might be extraneous or unnecessary. And I think that's something that still has a place in the digital realm. I just don't know how it would quite translate. It really all depends on how a show like this itself would, in the future move to a different platform or a different medium. Always be writing. Write whatever. Poetry, fiction, nonfiction, movie reviews. That was one thing I started doing in high school. I wrote a lot of movie reviews. One reason why I minored in film, because I enjoyed movies a lot. But having something, whether it's a topic or something, a hobby you're really interested in, having something to write about and to be able to rely on writing about that as often as you can is a huge, huge tool to have whenever you're trying to get, because producers do a lot of writing. We do a lot of editing too, and that's, it's a little bit different than, just straight up waking up every day, writing an 800-word article, and then, passing it off to a copy editor in the newspaper. But being able to write as often as you can also gives you time and makes you a little more inclined to check your own work. Because, anyone can write a sentence. It's not hard to write a sentence. What's hard is writing a sentence that has structure and makes sense, and that other people can read and go, oh, I understand what they're trying to say. So my biggest piece of advice is always be writing and always be checking your own work.